Okay, this third and final section is all about correcting for externalities, and there will be a bit of a discussion about public goods. Okay, so correcting for externalities. The goal is to internalize the externality to take into consideration social costs. There are a number of ways to do this. One is to one is to enforce something called property rights. Another way is an idea called the efficient voter rule, PAGU taxes, and finally something called Gaussian solutions. So let's look at each one of these in turn. First of all, property rights. Now, there's this idea called the tragedy of the commons. Very simply, that states that open access areas that do not have private ownership, are more likely to be abused and used over because nobody owns it, and there's actually an incentive to be the first one to use that thing. One An immediate thing action that comes to mind is open ocean, open water. Now, the person who came up with this idea, his name was Garrett Hardin in 1968. He pointed out that abuses of open access areas could be curtailed if the areas were privately held. Now, if the area was privately held, the polluter would be forced to reconsider polluting because they're not polluting on open land; they are polluting on private property. And your book has an example of the household that dumps sewage into a public lake. Rather than purchasing a septic system. And if you pollute onto a public lake, if the lake is not owned by somebody, then there's really nothing holding you back from doing that pollution of the lake. And from a very rational perspective, the government would obviously have to come involved. But if somebody owned the lake, then you're not just polluting; you're polluting on somebody's property. Okay, our next one, something called the efficient voter rule. When individuals who receive the same harm from a problem vote on whether to eliminate the problem at a uniform cost per individual, the outcome will be efficient regardless of each individual's contribution to the problem. Now, if each of the owners, giving to the septic tank example again, is required to buy a septic tank at less than the damage, then the process is efficient. Now, reading from the book that Anderson has here, let's say, suppose that instead of one person owning the whole lake, 3 lakeside owners pump their waste directly into a shared lake. As an alternative for dumping waste into the lake for $4,000 each, the residents could purchase septic systems. Over its lifetime, each septic system will prevent damage to the lake with a value today of $6,000. That damage from waste is distributed equally, with each resident incurring $2,000 of damage. If each resident decides between a $4,000 septic system and a $2,000 worth of damage each resident incurs from his or her own pipe, then it's rational to choose the straight pipe. However, it is best for society if residents use septic systems because the $4,000 price is below the $6,000 of total damage. So it is best if they all use a septic system, and in that way that can mitigate the damage caused by pollution in the lake. Now, further, it goes on to say the neighborhood association that sets rules for the residents could hold a vote on a policy requiring septic systems. The policy will cost each resident $4,000, and the policy would eliminate the $2,000 in damage each resident incurs from the 3 straight pipes, for a total benefit of $6,000. So in this case, the household buying the septic system would internalize the full $6,000 benefit of purchasing and vote in favor of the optimal policy. But that's if the cost is going to be less than the damage incurred. Alrighty. Next, we have something called the Bagoo taxes. This is named after Arthur Bagoo, famous economist from the 20th century, which was just 20 years ago. God, time flies. So the idea here is to tax the polluter for the amount of the social cost of the activities, making the polluter internalize the cost of their activities. Now, one can also subsidize activities to incentivize the producers to produce more of the good. Now, the carbon tax is definitely a type of Pagoo tax, and in both Pagoo taxes and subsidies, you are shifting demand or supply to equal what society would optimally want. In the case of the negative externality, you would want to tax up to the social cost. And for the subsidy, you would want to subsidize up to the social benefit. And it's a particular tax on a particular activity that is causing the negative or the positive externality. And a carbon tax, as is proposed, is certainly a type of Pagoo tax. Now, we have the idea of what's called Ronald-Coasian solutions, so the Coase theorem. Here, Ronald Coase, who was an economist again in the 20th century from the University of Chicago, said that if the parties can, if there are no transactions costs, private parties can bargain to reach the social optimum. But the case here, and as I've taught some of my microeconomics students, under the Coase theorem, you need to know who is doing the action and what the action is. Now, there are various different manifestations of the Coase theorem. I should first say that transactions costs are the costs of identifying and contacting the relevant parties. So the cost literally of doing the transaction. So the Coase theorem could manifest itself in the legal world through number one, something called an injunctive remedy. Under this case, the entitled party, or the entitled party who is benefiting, getting the damage remedies. The entitled party chooses the level of production. The other party must pay the entitled party if it wants the level of production adjusted in its favor. So citizens could prohibit the factory from polluting, and the polluter can only cause damage if it pays the citizens. So this is under injunctive remedy. Now we have something called a damages remedy. Here, the non-entitled party chooses the level of production, but they must compensate the entitled party for any losses resulting from that choice. So the polluter in this case chooses the level, but then they compensate the other party for any damages. And this would obviously be decided in a court of law. Now here, in the case of the graph, can private bargaining bring about an efficient solution? Now, and it depends on different circumstances. Let's see if I have anything. Let's see. This is the light bulb example, and if the light bulb company negotiates payments to the citizens in exchange for any permission to pollute, for the first light bulb, if the first truckload brings $4,000 in profit and only causes $500 in damages, So any payment from the company to the citizens between 500 and 4,000 for permission to produce one truckload will make both parties better off. So there's room for negotiation for the first, and there is perhaps room, I think, up to 2 for bargaining to be made. And again, both parties need to be made better off from the transaction. So this is all well and good, but what are some complications that could foil the beauty of the Coase theorem? One, as I mentioned just previously, you need to know who and what is doing the action. If you don't know that, and then this thing falls apart. It could be that the two parties would opt not to have any amount between 500 and 4,000 for that first unit, so they would not be willing to negotiate, and then the Coase theorem could break down. So, negotiations. And it might, in the case of, let's say, cigarette smoking, it might be abnormal and awkward to offer somebody a bribe to stop smoking. So there may be social norms to the idea of bribery for that. So the social norms can break up this, shall we say, beautiful arrangement here. Okay, this is going to be the third section, and then I'm going to do one more on public goods.